So Secretary Foxx, thank you very much. I understand, first off, you had an announcement you wanted to make, some remarks. So
Sure. Let me try to be very brief. Thanks first and foremost to you, Arun, and for Bloomberg Philanthropies, for the Aspen Institute, and also all the other great sponsors of this wonderful event. It's great to be here in Los Angeles, and I understand that over the last couple of days you've been doing a lot of visioning for the future, and NYU has done some forecasting about what cities will look like in 2030. Los Angeles being the home of automated vehicles and cars circling around looking for parking. In Boston, the idea of having a valet service that will allow you to empty your apartment and move things to and from. These are exciting ideas, exciting innovations that all involve our work to make sure mobility continues and expands in the 21st century. One of the things that we are looking to do as an administration is to continue seeding ideas for how to improve local communities, because when we improve local communities across this country, it adds up to a lot. One of the announcements that will be made later this week, the President and the Department of Energy will announce a competition for local communities to put forward ideas on how they can impact climate change in a good way and to improve resiliency. There may be more details later, but the point of it is we're working to empower local communities to do more. The last thing I'd say at the outset, thank you. The last thing I'd say at the outset is that as we look forward into the future of transportation, we know that technology is going to play a role. We know that investment is going to play a role, be it public or private. But right now in the U.S., we've got a major piece of business in front of us, which is creating a long-term, predictable, sustainable surface transportation bill that will move this country forward. And I look forward to having some conversation about that and other issues with you, Arun. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Well, first off, let's talk a little bit, as much as you can, maybe about this new initiative, this competition. Yeah. What are the sort of things you're expecting to see at the local level, and how big of an impact do you imagine that can have?
Well, obviously, the President has taken on the challenge of trying to reduce our carbon footprint as a country, this global climate change issue in so many ways. We're very proud of the work we've done on things like CAFE standards, for example, with automobiles becoming more fuel efficient by working together with the auto industry. But what I think will happen is you'll start to see the local communities become the laboratories that they are of innovation. And you'll see all kinds of things. You'll see public and private sector partnerships to reduce the carbon footprint of commercial buildings in cities. You'll see efforts to expand the use of intelligent transportation systems that allow traffic to move more seamlessly and reduce the overall carbon footprint. I think there are all kinds of ideas that will come as a result of this, some of them transportation related, some of them not. But the President understands that this has got to be an all-hands-on-deck issue, and involving local communities is part of that work.
And so how would that be integrated with the broader government-wide federal strategy to deal with climate change?
It's a piece of it. I mean, obviously, the EPA is working very hard on regulations affecting power plants and other areas. There's a lot of work that's being done with the international community to impact that. In USDOT, as I said, we've done some work on light vehicle standards when it comes to fuel economy. The President has charged myself and EPA Administrator McCarthy with working to focus now on medium-sized vehicles and trucks. And so we're going to work to get this work done, but it's not one big silver bullet. It's a lot of pieces coming together, and the local piece is a big one.
So let's talk about what you alluded to, the infrastructure crisis,
yeah,
which a lot of people are talking about this. Your predecessor said America is one big pothole. Ray LaHood said this just a few days ago. First off, in terms of what needs to be done, can you just, well, let's triage first. What are the biggest problems that we're facing that have to be dealt with?
Well,
most urgently?
If you were a surgeon and you walked into the operating room on our transportation system, you would find yourself feeling very under stress because, number one, our revenue curve is going down as vehicles become more efficient because we're building smarter cars, more fuel-efficient cars. It's affecting our ability to maintain and expand transportation choices in the country. At the same time, our country is growing. We have more manufacturing activity happen in the U.S. now than we have had 15 years earlier. And that means that freight needs to move around this country more efficiently. We're going to grow the country by 100 million people over the next 35 years, which means that if we're stuck with the same capacity we have today, travel times are going to get longer. And as I've heard many times from my friends in Los Angeles, folks don't want travel times to get longer, they want them to get shorter. To do that, we've got to invest. We've got to invest in transit. We've got to invest in expanding our highway system where we can. We've got to expand our investments in passenger rail, which I think will be another hallmark of the 21st century. And we've got to involve technology in helping us become more efficient at how we use our transportation system.
Where would you say of any point in the system, what's most likely to fail the soonest? If we're talking, air, rail, the roads, bridges.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. The older infrastructure in our country tends to be in the Midwest and the Northeast. And I think you will continue to have points of failure in those systems if we don't invest in state of good repair in those systems. I think the failures will happen differently in the Southeast and the West, which are fast-growing parts of the country, and it will be kind of a slow roll into failure, because what will happen is the population will continue surging and travel times will keep expanding year after year after year. It won't be like it hits you over the head with a mallet. It'll just be a death by 1,000 cuts. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to continue making the case to the American people that this is an issue we can change. We can affect this issue by smart investments, by streamlining projects and getting them moving faster, by involving public-private partnerships more nationally. And again, I think technology is going to play a huge role.
But in terms of the investment that needs to be made in infrastructure, which a lot of people agree on, the big question is how do we pay for it? And there's not an awful lot of agreement on that in Washington.
It's interesting that becomes a point of discussion, because the fact of the matter is people are paying for it already. If you go to the American Society of Civil Engineers, they have estimates in every state as to how much people are paying because of poor road conditions, be it wear and tear, additional fuel, broken axles, or whatever. I was in Missouri just a few days ago, and the estimate from the American Society of Civil Engineers is that in Missouri, people are paying $308 more per year because of our poor road conditions. So I think it's a fallacy to say, for folks to get caught up in, how we pay for it one way or the other. The American people are paying for it. And frankly, if we had 21st century infrastructure, there's a pretty good chance folks will be paying less.
But to get that, what do we have to do? I mean, is it a gas tax? Is it, it's got to come from somewhere.
Look, we have a lot of factors that are starting to disrupt the orthodoxy in transportation from 50 years ago. When the interstate system was built back in the 1950s, no one could see a point in time coming where revenues would go down with more people on the road. But that's the kind of system that we are walking into now. So we still have gas tax revenues that come in. It's just that on an annual basis, it's about $15 billion short of what we need just to keep the system afloat. So there needs to be another input somewhere. I think that our proposal, the Grow America Act, offers one idea there, which is business tax reform, taking the $2 trillion of corporate earnings that are overseas and bringing them back into this country and putting it to work to build American infrastructure would help us not only plus up our transportation system, but also allow us to invest more. And I think it is vitally important that we stop talking about trying to backfill the Highway Trust Fund and really get focused on where the country should be, which is investing more in infrastructure.
And speaking of disrupting orthodoxies, one of the other ideas that's put out there, although I think this overlaps with what you were saying, is the idea of more public-private partnerships, getting the private sector to invest more. But how do you do that?
Well, it's actually done a lot more than you think. At the local level, I can tell you, having been a mayor, that we did many, many tax increment financing projects in my city. Some of them involve putting in infrastructure like roads and other transportation networks. So these things are happening on the ground. The question is, can we systematize them, and can we help to build scale both on the public sector side and on the private sector side to help sizable deals, impactful deals happen in the country? And I happen to think that we can. We're setting up as a result of the President's executive order earlier this year, something called the Build America Transportation Investment Center, which is a fancy way of saying we're going to create a storefront both for the public sector to help them shape deals to be public-private sector eligible, and we're also going to reach out to the private sector community to try to engage them more in building American infrastructure. And I think this will impact not only roads, potentially transit, potentially heavy rail, but potentially ports and other investments that we need in this country.
Is this, Secretary, is this a fundamental change in how America is going to be dealing with infrastructure in the future? I mean, it was 20 years ago that we heard that the era of big government was over when it came to social programs. Yeah. Is this the same thing happening at the level of, things?
I think we're at a time, it's a bit like education has been in recent years, where I think folks have realized that, we can't tolerate failure over the long term. And frankly, the more we allow it over a sustained period of time, the more we're setting up future generations to not do as well as we did. And as a result of that, just like in education, you have to think long term. Anything we do today in transportation, if we started a project today here in Los Angeles, it might take us years to get it done, but it's the kind of thing we have to do. So I think what hasn't come across as clearly in Washington is what I see so clearly when I'm out in America, which is folks know their infrastructure is crumbling. They know what kind of infrastructure they want. They know how it's connected to jobs and quality of life. They just need the resources and wherewithal to get it done. And in Washington, unfortunately, infrastructure is almost always focused on the Highway Trust Fund and whether the Highway Trust Fund can get patched up. And that's not the way we're going to move forward.
So I don't mean to be so pointed in asking this, but you work for a Democratic administration.
Yeah.
Are you saying that there needs to be more power at the local level and less interference from Washington?
I think that as we evolve in our transportation system, we first of all need to have more resources directed to it. And then we also need to think about how those resources are directed. I think that the state model of supporting and maintaining and building the interstate system is still a fine model. But if we add more money into the system, there's several things we'd like to do differently. We'd like to, first of all, have a national freight network that not only, we have 50 freight networks across the country. We don't have a single one. But what if we had a pool of resources that performed like Race to the Top, where we said to the states, hey, if you work together, you create scale for your investments, we'll help you build multi-state rail systems, multi-state highway systems to move goods. We need to have more money flowing directly into metropolitan planning organizations so local communities can have a little more control over how projects get done where they live. There's several reforms that we would urge under the Grow America Act, but again, we've got to get unstuck from this idea that we've got to keep doing that for the next 50 years, transportation the way we've done for the first 50 years of the interstate system.
You, of course, have dealt with these issues at the local level.
Yeah.
as a mayor, and as you've been talking, you've talked about ways in which that's informed your approach to this. I'm curious, though, about when you came into the national stage,
yeah.
What surprised you the most, based on what you'd seen in Charlotte, like things you were seeing other places that...
Yeah, I'd say that when you're a mayor, things are like the microwave, you stick it in, it's ready in 30 seconds. In Washington, it's like a crock pot. And so you have to slow cook everything. And it's tough, but part of the goal that I have is I know that this is an incredibly consequential time in infrastructure in this country. And I know that I have an opportunity, along with the president and along, frankly, with the Congress, on a bipartisan basis to help chart a path forward for this country that will go well past this term of an administration. And so I think we've got to figure out a way to work together and get something done. And I'm working with Republicans and Democrats to try to do it.
How are you approaching that in terms of the bipartisan part of it? Because it's a very contentious time. You were confirmed 100 to nothing, but that pretty much doesn't happen anymore.
Are you saying that's my high watermark? Yeah. It's only downhill from there? I don't know.
You start off, 100%. It's hard.
Well, look, I spend a lot of time in so-called red and so-called blue states. And I do that intentionally because when I go and listen to what local folks are saying or even state governments are saying, it's really the same thing. They know they need more. They know they need it to be done faster. And they know that they need Washington to help. And that's what gives me a little encouragement that this issue is going to eventually rise above partisan politics and help us get something done. There are frankly some Republicans who understand this issue very well and are very interested in trying to get something done. I would cite, someone like the chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Bill Schuster, who is really good on this issue and is working on both sides of the aisle to get something done. But we've got to get critical mass in Congress focused on a solution and get them to move on that solution in a bipartisan way.
If we do this the right way,
Yep.
where do you see transportation in America in 5 or 10 years? And give us the dark scenario as well.
Well, I think if we do it the right way, we will invest the dollars, but we will also think long-term about how the country's growing. These trends that I talked about earlier of maintenance issues in the Northeast and in the Midwest, the explosive growth that's happening in the Southeast and the West, those are things that have to be thought about as we build an ecosystem for how that money moves around. That's why I say that I think a focus on a national freight network would be useful. A robust fix and repair program would be great for the system, as well as working to increase some of our investments in passenger rail and in transit. Our bill proposes a 70% increase in transit investment, a 22% increase in highways, and it actually pulls in passenger rail into the surface transportation program. So we would do away with the Highway Trust Fund as we know it and create a single surface transportation fund to go forward. I think you're going to see technology really jumping into transportation in a big way. One of the things we've done recently is we've announced an intention to develop a rule on vehicle-to-vehicle technology, which is a foundation, we believe, of ultimately autonomous vehicles. That will improve safety by a substantial margin, but it will also create a lot more efficiency in the system long term. So I think we've got a very bright future of integrating technology, and I'm sure there are things that we haven't even thought about that'll be thought about within the next 2 or 3 years.
Finally, Secretary, we have about a minute left. You're on a tour across the country right now. Can you talk a little bit about why you're doing that and what you're hoping to take back to Washington?
Yeah, I actually think of it as a revival, and it's an effort to revive the idea that we build things in this country and we build connections between people, we build communities, and we've built the finest, most robust, the safest transportation system the world's ever seen. And we're guardians of it. And we have to make sure that we are good protectors of that system and we pass along a better system to our kids. So I've been to almost, I'm trying to get to every state before the end of the year. I don't know if I'll make it. But I'm trying to get there because I want to hear what communities want to get done. And when we make a Tiger grant announcement in Kansas City, Missouri, we're also talking to them about the need to do more grants like that in the future. When we're here in Los Angeles and we can break ground on a regional connector light rail system, we know that's going to be impactful to the community. But we want to remind people that they have more things on their to-do list that have to get done, and we need Congress's help to help that happen.
Secretary Foxx, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. Thank you. Arun, thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.